Good evening, everybody from Columbus, Ohio. Welcome to all of you for another webinar of the Jewish Voice for Peace Central Ohio chapter. And it's a pleasure to have you all with us tonight. I'm going to turn this over now to one of our members, Connie Hammond, who will be introducing our speaker. So Connie, go ahead, please.
Okay, our speaker tonight is a very dear person, Reverend Michael Yoshii, and he's co-chair of an organization called Friends of Wadi Foquin. Reverend Yoshii received his Master's of Divinity degree in 1986 from the Pacific School of Religion, and upon graduation served in the California, Nevada Annual Conference as an ordained elder until his retirement in 2020. He was a recipient of the PSR Distinguished Alumni Award in 2002, recognizing his pastoral leadership and social justice activism at the Buena Vista United Methodist Church, where he was appointed in 1988. His work included local racial justice issues, LGBTQ equity, and affordable housing activism. In post-retirement ministry, Reverend Yoshii serves on the International Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, Global Council, and is co-chair of Wadi Foquin, a partnership with a West Bank village. Reverend Yoshii was the convener of the United Methodist for Kairos Response in 2010 and continues to contribute to that organization. So with that, we'll turn the meeting over to Michael Yoshii, and he will be willing to take questions whenever people are ready, when he's finished speaking.
Well, I want to thank you, Connie, for inviting me to be with your chapter. And just to say a word of thanks also, Connie's been helping us with some of our advocacy work with congressional members. And my understanding is what you wanted was to share with folks a little bit more about Wadi Foquin for those who don't know much about the village, but also some of the mechanics of how we've started our partnership called Friends of Wadi Foquin, and also particularly some of the mechanics of our congressional advocacy work that we've been doing. So I've got a bunch of slides to share, and it may be more than you need. But let me just say, if you want to just stop me at any point and ask any questions, just do so rather than wait till the end for questions. And then I'll try to move through them as best I can. And I'm assuming also, because the chapter is active with the issue, that you're very familiar with the issue. So that's not what this is about. It's more about this particular way in which the Palestinian issues are affecting this one particular village. Am I correct around that?
Correct.
I'm seeing some nods. Okay, great.
Right.
So let me go to my screen share and my slides. Okay. So Friends of Wadi Foquin, basically an organization that does work with the village of Wadi Foquin in 3 different areas: community development. We do annual trips to the region. We frame it in terms of Holy Land pilgrimages with a Palestinian narrative, and then our advocacy work as well. For the slides today, I'm going to break it up into 3 parts. One about the village, and then about the partnership, in terms of the organizational mechanics, how we've developed it, and then thirdly, some of the work that we're doing. So I'll try to move through as best we can. So the village itself is an agricultural village, of course, in the West Bank, and there's different spellings of it. If you Google it, you'll see this spelling, F-O-Q-U-I-N, which is what the village has asked us to use in spelling. But if you go to F-U-K-I-N, you'll probably get more Google hits on that and a lot of information that you'd find in terms of background around the village. This is a map of the West Bank, and so you'll see Jerusalem and the Bethlehem area. I have a close-up map here. Here's Bethlehem here, Bethlehem district, and the green line. And then Wadi Foquin is nestled right next to the green line there. You can see west of Bethlehem. And in this map, you can kind of see the peach, beige areas are the Palestinian areas, and then the bluish are the settlements. You'll see, of course, that Israel's ignoring the green line and developing the settlements in this area. This whole area here is called the Gush Etzion settlement block. And so Wadi Foquin is very much threatened by the potential annexation of the Gush Etzion settlement block into Israel. Kind of an ongoing question and issue for them. The village itself is an agricultural village, very much steeped in the relationship to the land that they have. And most families have their plots of land that they farm. There's about 1,300 villagers in Wadi Foquin, and they are very proud of their produce, which is particularly marketed to Bethlehem, the Bethlehem marketplace. And like many of the small villages, have very, very strong social life. Weddings are very important to the life of the community. Got their own schools and activities that go on. And one of the major challenges for them is the ongoing land confiscation for the expansion of the legal settlement of Batar Elite. This is a view of Batar Elite on the hillside of Wadi Foquin. In the corner here is a photo before that particular expansion. Batar Elite currently has a population of 60,000, and the plans are to expand to about 100,000 over the next several years. There's another before and after photo. We like to talk about Wadi Foquin being a microcosm of the larger situation in the West Bank. And so we always include this slide in our presentations to show the expansion of settlements throughout the West Bank, and the red dots kind of illustrate that. And also the expansive growth of settler population in the West Bank as well. In Wadi Foquin, the problems of the settlement of Batar Elite also produce problems for them in terms of runoff of raw sewage into the village. You can see here this photo of a farmer who's lamenting the toxification of his crops because of the raw sewage. There's also natural water springs in the village, which are affected also by runoff from the construction of the settlements, limestone that dry them off. There are occasions of settler violence and vandalism as well. I didn't have photos I could pull up of more recent things, but just rest be assured that settlers often will come down into the village, puncture people's tires, and vandalize the greenhouses, and so forth. You're all familiar with a separation wall. We just wanted to help locate it in juxtaposition to Wadi Foquin. So this is the Bethlehem wall. And then you see how it snakes around throughout the Bethlehem district. And I'm bringing up this photo back up again that I showed before. And the red shows where the wall has been built, and the purple shows the planned route of the wall. This particular portion of the wall has not been built yet, and it's been suspended through some activism that's been successful in kind of halting the wall for the time being. But you'll see that the boundary of the wall goes around the whole Gush Etzion settlement area. And so the carving of new boundaries is already taking place. Of course, like many other places, land confiscation is the order of the day for settlement expansion. It will come to people in a form of a communication like this. In 2014, there was an announcement of 1,000 acres of land to be annexed in the West Bank for settlement expansion, and a large portion of this was in Wadi Foquin. And this photo shows the sign posted by the military police indicating land to be confiscated for what they call Judea Samaria, as they invoke the biblical terminology of the West Bank for themselves. It's particularly problematic for this settlement of Batar Elite draws upon ultra-Orthodox Jews from particularly Russia and Northeast United States, coming with the predisposition theologically that the land belongs to them. And so they come in with sort of hostile attitudes toward people of Wadi Foquin, thinking that Wadi Foquin folks are squatting on their land. And here's how the land confiscation orders get manifested in different parts of the village. You can see here this gentleman holding up his papers, and then different areas that would be subjected to confiscation. Here's some photos in that particular period where land was being leveled and confiscated. Some land destruction to farmland that took place in the before and after photo. The year after that particular announcement of land confiscation was the destruction of 1,300 fruit trees in Wadi Foquin, and bulldozers were accompanied by soldiers who came in to demolish 1,300 trees. Ironically, that land wasn't taken over, and this particular farmer was able to raise money to replant saplings for his farmland. And it's just continues to be kind of a cat and mouse game that continues to go on. Not too long after this, in 2017, Benjamin Netanyahu came to Beitar Elite for a cornerstone ceremony announcing the settlement expansion of Beitar Elite and other settlements in the West Bank. In this photo, he's facing Wadi Foquin with Beitar Elite behind him. And there were a lot of other photos that showed him meeting with them. And of course, at that time, he was currying the favor of the settlement population for the election that was coming up. And even though he was defeated, his plan for settlement expansion that here is shown in this infogram for 2020 that shows the kind of expansive plans for settlement development continues to be the policy, even under Naftali Bennett. This is a photo map from folks in Wadi Foquin showing the loss of their footprint from the time of the Nakba till today. And whenever things like this are happening, there will be protests in the community, of course, but they'll be met with tear gas and oftentimes night raids to come in and arrest young people. And I think that's a story that gets duplicated in many other villages and serves as an intimidating factor for people not to have their protests. So I want to shift now to the actual development of the organization of Friends of Wadi Foquin. It actually started, I was serving as the pastor of Buena Vista Methodist Church in Alameda, and a member of our church, Jose Arcelana, who was then the chair of what we called our Church and Society Committee, went to Palestine in 2007, and he had a very spiritual epiphany when he visited the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem. And at the place of the grotto, where it's said to be the place of Jesus's birth, he knelt down to pray and had an experience of God speaking to him that we should be involved in a partnership with Palestinians. And when he came back and told folks about that, it was very clear that it was about partnering with Palestinians. It wasn't about taking up the Israel-Palestine issue and debating it and so forth, but it was being in relationship with Palestinians. So what we did was we called upon our liaison, our United Methodist liaison to the West Bank at that time, Janet Lar-Lewis, who's pictured here with some kids. And we asked her to come out to California, which she was subject to doing anyway, to do her itineration and speaking tours. And she consulted with us in March of 2009 to talk about what it would mean for us to form a partnership with Palestinians. And she made the suggestion that we partner with the village of Wadi Foquin, where I had been familiar with as well, as I had visited there in 2006. But with her suggestion, we had a congregational meeting about it. And then the decision became an affirmative one to partner with this small village. We were a small congregation. And so part of the idea was that forming people-to-people relationships with Wadi Foquin would be a kind of a good place to start, a simple place, and try not to be too ambitious about it, but to begin developing the relationships with the people there. And our membership embraced the idea at that particular time after we went through several meetings with different committees. And at the same time, there was a church in Berkeley, Berkeley Methodist United, which was also talking about working with us as well. And so it kind of was coming out of two different congregations in some way. We started with a Beehive Project to raise money to purchase beehives for alternative economic support for villagers in cultivating honey for the village. One of the things we began to look at when we talked about developing a partnership was thinking about our resources in the Methodist Church. And I had belonged to something called the Community Development Program, which was started in the 60s, which is a community organizing methodology that developed out of the kind of the legacy of MLK when he was assassinated in 1968. This program developed at the time. And then, of course, our international agency called the Board of Global Ministries, which sends our mission liaisons to the Palestine area. And then our General Board of Church and Society, which is our social action agency internationally, which had long time been involved in Palestine advocacy. We adopted something called a Circle of Concern and Response, or CCR, of 5 ways for people to get engaged in the partnership. And that would be through prayer, through giving, education, engagement, and advocacy. These would be 5 different ways or spokes of a wheel that people could participate without necessarily being involved in all 5. And persons could be involved in one, but not the other. And so this would help us in a way to engage people where some people might start with prayer, but maybe they didn't want to be involved in anything else, or they might be very want to be engaged in advocacy, but we're not that enthusiastic about giving per se. This I want to credit Sandy Olawine, who was our previous liaison to the West Bank for the United Methodist Church, and Janet succeeded her when Sandy wrapped up her work in 2006. But Sandy coined this Circle of Concern and Response and suggested that congregations taking up this work use this model as a way to engage people. And we've seen over time that this is very interactive, that people may start with prayer, but then they can move to advocacy, or they can start with giving, but they move to engagement and so forth and so on. And so kind of really see it as a dynamic process and a really good way to allow people to enter into participation at whatever level of interest they might have to start with. We started our organizing by raising some funds for a part-time organizer, and Kaz Takahashi was our first organizer, and Kira Zam was our second organizer. We don't have any staff now, and we got to a certain place where we felt that staff wasn't needed because Kaz and Kira did the work to help us build kind of our structure and kind of our method about going about doing what we're doing. One of the things that we committed to in the partnership was to bring people to the region every year. And so we committed to having a trip to Palestine every year. And our first trip was organized in March 2010. And part of this was to bring people to see for themselves, be able to come and see Wadi Foquin in particular, but to kind of see the landscape of the Palestinian narrative in terms of a construct of a Holy Land tour. We're very unapologetic about putting that forward as a Palestinian narrative for those who may have been on other trips to the Holy Land and seeing things through the eyes of Israeli tourism. This was a trip in 2012 and one in 2013 and 14. On our trips, we normally would go about planting olive trees as a symbol of resistance to the construction of the wall there. And here you see photos of folks who were on a trip planting trees and enjoying our sense of solidarity. Now, we do trips every year, and Reverend Mike Friedrich and Reverend Emily Lynn are co-chairs of what are called our engagement circle, and they organize our trips. If anybody's interested, if folks in this chapter want to work with us on a trip, we'd be glad to work with you and steer you to Mike or Emily to organize such thing. And then our tour guidance is usually with Atta Minostromora, who's a licensed tour guide, and our liaison to the village, and also Janet Lewis, who as I mentioned before, had been our liaison to Palestine and had been there for 20 plus odd years and has hosted many tours. One of the things we began to recognize, although it wasn't an intention in the beginning, was that Wadi Foquin is primarily a Muslim village. And you can see the masjid there in the center of the photo. And a significant thing that took place along the way was in a meeting with Yusuf Minastra, who was considered a very respected person in the village, in asking him about the best ways to go about supporting the village. He would reiterate to us the value of praying and always kind of keeping centered with God, and that if we focused on that, whether we're doing things that are small or large, it really doesn't matter as long as we don't get distracted from what God intends for us in our partnership. So we all know the phrase inshallah, and he would always kind of invoke that for us to kind of follow the path that God has us on and try to not be distracted by other things, because it's so easy to get distracted by just the enormity of the issues. And I think that's really helped us to, in some sense, stay humble about who we are and what we're doing. We're not a big group. We're a very small group, but to not be overly ambitious and yet not be surprised by the things that can occur when we work together in this partnership. Unfortunately, Yusuf passed away in 2017. It was a massive funeral for him in the village. Janet was there at that particular time. And a couple years after his passing, we created the Yusuf Minostromora Scholarship. So this is one of the programs that we have in terms of our giving. And we designated this for scholarships for people who'd like to go on one of our trips to help supplement their funds, but also to have funds for people coming from Wadi Foquin to our region, and being able to have funds for them as well to take trips here to the U.S. And we have hosted a number of speaking tours from people in Wadi Foquin. So here I'm gonna shift now to our community development projects. And so as I mentioned earlier, we started with the Beehive Project, and of course this was a very modest project in which we had our children involved, our women's groups, and other folks in the church, and our partner congregations, to just raise money to purchase beehives, and they were set aside in the southern portion of the village, and different families took upon the task of tending to the beehives. It seemed like a new project was starting each year, and the next year they asked us to help contribute to renovating an abandoned house so that they could turn it into a community center. And this was a really good project for us to collaborate with others visiting the region who were not necessarily part of our own partnership, but maybe they were Methodist churches visiting the region from other places. And Janet was able to then organize them to come and work and do volunteer work at this particular space. And so we had, I think this group came from Oregon or something, to help with the painting and the renovation and so forth. And then turning it into a space where people visiting could have a place to locate and to visit. And I must say again that in our partnership, the principles are that we would respond to the requests of the village. As the village identified needs that they had or things they'd like us to do, then we would meet and say, do we have the capacity to do that? And in this case, we said, we're happy to fundraise around this. And then the next year, we focused on children and youth projects, and particularly young men, particularly with the issues of young men coming out of prison and having learned more about their history in prison, much like we hear the narrative of Malcolm X. Young people feeling that sense of wanting to learn more about their history, and then in the summer supporting summer children's program as well. We moved on to women's projects, and one of the earlier photos I had shown was at the Cindy Ann of Galilee, a women's collective of Israeli and Arab women working on economic sustainability. And they came down to the village to teach basket weaving. And our partnership support was to help fund that particular project. There's also the embroidery as well. Along the way, they came up with this idea of creative resistance to land confiscation. I think it was following the photos that I showed you about the destruction of the fruit trees that they thought about building a soccer field on land that was being subjected to land confiscation. And so they identified a particular parcel of land, and this was kind of a multi-level project in the sense that they were taking land that was to be subjected to confiscation, but making positive use of it. With our seed funding, they could hire people locally within the village to do the work, give them jobs, but also show the Israeli authorities that they had international partners. And so they put up this sign to show that we were working with them, so that if they came by in their Jeeps and would look at this and think about demolishing it, that they would think twice, because they knew that they had international partners on this. And then, of course, the biggest part of it was to create something very productive for the children and the youth. And as they were able to get the additional funding to complete the project, put in the grass and the night lights and the boundaries and so forth, the soccer field was launched, and kids use it and continue to use it today. And this has helped them also kickstart a youth sports club that's very active now in the village. And they do have a soccer tournament every Ramadan. This past year, we heard after the fact that they had dedicated the soccer tournament in memory of this man, Ahmed Manasra, who had been shot and killed by checkpoint guards in 2019 after he had been trying to help a family who was wounded on the side of the road. He helped take a gentleman to the Bethlehem Hospital and helps actually saved his life. And when Ahmed came back to help the wife and the kids in the car, he was shot by the guard towers. The family took the issue to the courts. The person who killed them was exonerated. You can imagine this was a very, very big issue in the village. There was a massive funeral for Ahmed, and this is a photo of his wife in mourning there. But after the man was exonerated from the killing, this is when they decided to dedicate the soccer tournament in his memory. And so it's a kind of a way that young people are also kind of engaged in their own sense of activism and education. This is a long view of the soccer field, kind of show you. And there have been Jeeps that have come by on occasion, but the soccer field is still standing. So we can say it's probably been our most successful combination of community development and resistance to land confiscation. Our latest planned project was to be a guest house project in which they were going to take other land that was subjected to confiscation and create a guest house for visitors coming to the village so that they can have places to stay. This was put aside for a couple of reasons. We had some problems with some of the land designation, but also then the pandemic hit, and we redirected our funds to other directions for the time being. Connie wanted us to talk a little bit about political advocacy, and in 2013, the village had asked us to see if we can do something about educating folks around what they saw as a pending land annexation. And we utilized our resources in DC, where we have the General Board of Church and Society. This is a photo of their office, which is right across the street from Capitol Hill. And so this is where we would have our hub of organizing for us to do our own briefing in DC. And we partnered with some organizations to help us open up a opportunity for primarily congressional staff to come hear from a panel that we flew in from Palestine. And here we had Fahmy Manasra, Ahmed Sokar, who was then the mayor, Raed, who was a official from the Bethlehem district. And we also had a member of Tzur Hadassah who was from the neighboring village on the other side of the Green Line, from the Israeli village. In 2016, we had another briefing in DC, again with Mayor Sokor there, but we had another panel of folks, including Fahmy and Mayor Sokor again, but Kifa Manastra, who was a professor of women's studies, and then our own General Secretary of our General Board of Jewish Society, Susan Henry Crow, was a panelist as well. And you can see the juxtaposition of this particular briefing because, in fact, in 2013, when we had that briefing and we were warning about the land confiscation, it took place. It happened, and then you know, the destruction of the fruit trees, and then our project with the soccer field ensued. They asked us for another opportunity to do a briefing because of new confiscation orders that they were seeing coming up along the way. I think in its best form, I think our education has been good to raise awareness about what's going on in Wadi Foquin. And for us, we also believe that whenever we talk about Wadi Foquin, we're talking about the West Bank in general as well, because what's happening in Wadi Foquin are the same trends going on elsewhere. In this particular past year, we were confronted with some new issues around land confiscation for road construction. And we've been showing this quite a bit. This map shows this yellow line, which is a proposed road to cut through the eastern portion of Wadi Foquin. And this is going to really support the infrastructure of the transportation systems for the settlers. Here's a photo of Bethlehem, and you can see this is the purple line, which is that road, and the red lines show existing separate roads for the Israelis in the settlements. This map is interesting because it shows again, Tzur Hadassah, Wadi Foquin is here. This is the road, but the road is actually connecting two other roads. A road in the north and a road in the south. The road in the north is 375, which goes into Israel and then comes into the West Bank. And this other road down here is 367, which goes into Israel and it comes into the West Bank. So you can see how they're ignoring the green line in terms of building their transportation infrastructure, which will kind of tie together different roads. This kind of again shows the infrastructure of the transportation system here and here that's already built. There's been a really great study called Highway to Annexation, which talks about the transportation infrastructure for the settlement enterprise. So we can see that the one little road in Wadi Foquin is part of a much more massive infrastructure. But if that road were to be built, there would be farmland that would be annexed and destroyed. Here's some aerial photos of farmland that would be destroyed. And then here as well. What we began to do this last summer was to do webinars to educate folks on what's taking place. This was one that we had with a friend of ours, Hatem Bazian from UC Berkeley, and also with American Muslims for Palestine, which we were talking about the larger dynamics of what's going on with settler colonialism and land confiscation, and how Wadi Foquin was emblematic of that. We've been involved in a lot of public demonstrations also on the larger issues going on with other places facing demolitions and land confiscation. And we spent a lot of time last year from, I'd say, July to September meeting with congressional offices, and Zoom was a blessing in that regard during the pandemic because it allowed us to meet with offices across the country without having to go to DC. And out of our 30+ visits, we had Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Congressman David Price issue a letter to the State Department addressing the impending land confiscation for the building of the road. And we had 20 other offices who signed on to that particular letter. The Palestinian media covered the congressional letter quite a bit. I mean, some people would think, well, it's just a little letter. What difference is it going to make? But it did have some impact in Palestine we were sent these news articles that covered the announcement of that letter, and it was on TV the first weekend after the letter was issued. The governor of Bethlehem District came to support for Wadi Foquin with the olive harvest there, and Athman Astra, our liaison there, was interviewed on Palestine media. And so for the first few weeks, they were feeling good that the letter had made some difference in terms of the consciousness of what's going on with the people, and knowing that things were being monitored. The State Department did make a visit in December of 2021, December 17th, and this gentleman here was John Robbins, one of the officials from the Jerusalem office, and they had a sit-down meeting to take notes on things for them. Unfortunately, about less than 2 weeks later, there were 45 olive trees that were demolished in the village. They were not the land that the road would be built on, but they were part of demolition orders for homes, water cisterns, and compost facilities as well, that had been issued at 2 different times during the past year. And the olive trees were put to rest on December 29th. And this has created another piece for us to look at in terms of our advocacy. These are demolition orders that this gentleman is getting for his cistern. This is what they look like. And his property has not been touched yet, however, nor the others who have demolition orders for their homes. I'm gonna, let's see, how are we doing on time, Connie?
I think we're just fine, Michael.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a, I'm gonna pull out of this for just a moment and go to a video, because I have a 1-minute video of the demolition of the olive trees.
Michael, did you want to share that with sound?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, actually, the sound is not that important. It's not, you
Okay,
don't hear
good.
too much anywhere. So that's part of a virtual tour that we actually have put together, and just wanted to let you know what we're doing as a result of all that's taking place. So what we're doing right now is we're working with offices that signed on to the Lee Price letter to follow up on the olive tree demolition. Their letter that they issued in October didn't talk about demolition orders. It was focused specifically on the land confiscation for the road. So we've actually had in this last month 2 meetings with congressional offices. We had about 6 offices that joined for 2 different meetings to show them our virtual tour and to ask them to follow up by writing supplemental letters to address the olive tree demolitions. And so we're in conversation with them as we speak. And then now what we're doing is we're outreaching to new offices that did not sign on to our letter, with presentations on Wadi Foquin in both the House and the Senate. We'd like to increase our outreach to different offices and have more offices weigh in on this issue. And then we're also working with young adults in the village for a presentation to the State Department official. There were 2 officials that came on December 17th, and one was working with the Human Rights Report. The other was working with monitoring settlement expansion activity and settler violence. So we have a meeting set up with her via Zoom in about a week and a half, and we're prepping young adults in the village so that they can make a presentation to her. She's also very interested in environmental issues, so we're going to try to zero in on that aspect of things as well. So for our group here today, and if your chapter is interested in working with us, one of the things that we're asking people to do is contact the Israeli embassy to protest the demolition of olive trees. A reason why we're addressing the Israeli embassy is we want to contact them directly. And I did send Connie an email to you with the narrative of our messaging to them, if folks are interested in doing that. There's a poem also that was written by Fahmy Menasra about the olive trees and how important they are to Palestinian families that accompanies that particular ask. And we're asking people to send the poem along with your own message around how you are concerned about this. And the other just kind of came about with my conversation with Connie earlier today is that if you're interested to help us, you can generate constituent calls or a petition to your Senator Sherrod Brown to request a meeting with us for Friends of Wadi Foquin. We have met with about 6 Senate offices, including Warren, Kane in Virginia, Sanders, Markey, and I'm forgetting the person's name in Oregon. And we've had very good response, but none of them have been willing to kind of take a lead on this from the Senate side. So we are looking for a Senate office, and if that's something your chapter would be interested in helping us with, we'd love to work with you on that. So that's pretty much it for this presentation today. And I want to just thank you for giving us time for that to be with you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Yoshii. I'm wondering what is the current status of the road that they were building? Is that on hold?
Yeah, so the current status of the road, we had heard that there was some things moving forward with it when we started our campaign. I think the good news of it right now is that it's not been touched, and there was some talk about they're going to come into the village and try to convene something with village leaders and some conversation with them, but that's not happened. And so, like I say, on the other issues, it's sort of a cat and mouse game. I mean, we know that there are these large plans for that transportation infrastructure, and that what we're doing is really a small piece in trying to stop this from happening. And for now, it's not happening. So that's sort of our good news. The bad news, of course, is that the olive tree demolition took place. Again, it's not in the same area where the road would be built, but nonetheless, there will be olive trees that will be demolished if that road is constructed. And so we, in our messaging that we're putting out there, both for the letters that we're asking members to write, is to value the life of those olive trees and know that they are part and parcel of the life of families in the village.
Thank you. If anybody else has a question or a comment, please feel free to just unmute yourself.
Connie? Oh, wait.
There's a Roberta Miller asking.
This is very interesting, but very, very disturbing. From the vegetable gardens that are being destroyed, what's taking their place? I mean, this is a food source, not just for the Palestinians, but for everyone in the area. What's more disturbing now is the threat of the cisterns, water, which is so scarce in that area.
Right.
It's very disturbing, and I'm taking it that as much as we try to get the support of our legislatures, the Jewish, what is it? I forget the name, always the name of it. But anyway, the politicians on behalf of the Jewish state are too powerful for the officials to resist.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think none of us is naive about the reality in Congress and what our situation is. And yet this is something As I mentioned, as we talk about trying to follow the plans we have, I don't think we're being naive about the reality of Congress, but at the same time, we're doing what we can do. And so as we work with people, we see where it goes and kind of move forward a step at a time. But I think what you're saying, Roberta, about the reality of what's happening in Palestine is just, it's really devastating. I mean, if it were happening in any of our neighborhoods, I mean, what the heck do you think we'd be doing? We wouldn't be sitting on a Zoom meeting, that's for sure. I mean, we'd be out there. We'd be out there in front of, bulldozers and all that. I'm not sure you had a question though, or if that was just a statement you were making.
Right. Somebody has a hand raised, Paul or Laurie.
Yeah, I just love your speaking, your commitment to the Palestinian people. Since I've got drawn into this, Lori and I have gone to Palestine a couple times, and we've been so accepted by those people.
Absolutely.
And their distress. They're the most beautiful people on the planet. And to see these settlements devouring their communities, and that's what they're doing. They settle over top of beautiful communities and just move down on top of them. It's grotesque. And it disturbs me so much. I love what you're doing. I don't know where to go with this. It drives my mind crazy.
Yeah, I really feel what you're feeling in your heart, Paul. And I think it's what drives us to do what we're doing as well. I mean, we're doing what we can do as a small organization. As I mentioned, we're a very small organization, but we do feel like we're making some impact as we're doing the work that we do. I'm seeing Mike Friedrich in our video here. Mike is the one I mentioned in the slides who worked with Emily Lynn on our trips. So one thing you might want to do if you want to work with us on organizing a trip from folks in your chapter, you can connect up with Mike and Emily. But as I mentioned in my last slide, if you all would be willing to work with us to reach your senator, Sherrod Brown, I'd love that. I was looking at his website and noticed that he supports rural agricultural towns in the state. And he might be interested in the agricultural history of Wadi Foquin. He supports supporting the environment and the natural resources. And you can see in what Roberta was saying that what's going on with Wadi Foquin is devastating to the natural habitat there as well. And also he supports transportation infrastructures here in the US. And so those three issues I think might be of interest to his office. Connie tells me that he's not that strident on Palestinian rights, but it sure couldn't help educate him on what's going on there. And maybe he might be as outraged as you are about what's happening once he sees what's going on.
Sherrod Brown is a Zionist. We've tried to we've talked to him and Portman both. They send us letters back that the Palestinians are terrorists. Those guys are not going to work with us. Sherrod Brown is not going to work with us. Those guys are worried about staying in office and making their easy money, and they're just going with the program.
We're actually from Cleveland, Ohio, so we meet with JVP Cleveland, but we've often been on some of these Central Ohio Zoom sessions.
Yeah.
You guys have some really great speakers, but Paul has written to Sherrod Brown numerous times and just gets these responses back saying, well, check out my website, see what I'm doing. He doesn't respond to the issues that Paul addresses about Palestine.
No.
Laura, you were cut off from your mic. I couldn't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll make it short. Paul has written to Sherrod Brown. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
has written to Sherrod Brown numerous times, along with Rob Portman, our senator, about the concerns on what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. And the responses he gets back are pat letters that say they don't respond anything to what Paul is addressing, but they say, check out my website and see what I'm doing.
Or they talk about the Palestinian terrorists. Like
Yeah.
Palestinians are terrorists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we get those responses too.
I think the Reverend already knows about that very well. But we have, Connie, maybe you can say something about, we have tried with Sherrod Brown, haven't we? You're muted. You're muted.
We have met in the past with his staff here in Columbus, and his staff actually has been sympathetic, but we haven't been able to get him to move on any of the issues that we've brought up, time and time again, and it is discouraging. Sherrod Brown is very good in a lot of ways, but I still think that it's possible to get through to him if we can get through to the right staff, and maybe working with the staff in DC might give us a more direct link to him. Also, I think when we do these kinds of things, we're also informing the staff of what's going on. So I really think it might be a good idea to look into that. The other thing I was wondering if you might want to talk about is Eyewitness Palestine has been working with Friends of Wadi Foquin to do they have set up 3 virtual tours of Wadi Foquin in February. And I can send the information on how to sign that up for that out to our Gmail list. But if you're interested, that's another good way to support Friends of Wadi Foquin.
Yeah, I can tell you how that came about too. In our working with Lee and Price's office, we were talking about trying to have a tour that some of the offices could go on. And with the pandemic, of course, travel has been very limited. And then we came up with the idea of doing a virtual tour. And so we came up with footage from the village, and that's where we've come up with this virtual tour, about 20-minute long, that we have actually shown to the several congressional offices that have signed on to the Lee Price letter. And now Palestine Legal, not Palestine, Palestine, Eyewitness Palestine is going to host that tour for the general public. And they're helping us also with expanding our reach to different audiences by doing the tour and then helping with our advocacy as well. But that doesn't take away from the in-person tours that Mike and Emily are trying to work on for Friends of Wadi Foquin again. So that's just another pitch in case people are interested in making the trip there and sometime in the future as well. I do want to go back, Connie, just for a minute to the advocacy, and I want to thank Connie because Connie helped set up a meeting with Congresswoman Beatty's staff. When we were doing our outreach last year, Connie responded and we set up a meeting. And I think this again speaks to some of the struggles and issues around trying to do legislative advocacy with these offices. They politely kind of heard our spiel and our slideshow, and actually the staff did come to have another meeting with us to go through the virtual tour, but they did not sign on to the letter, and then he did not make a commitment to do anything at this particular moment in time. And I worry that they are basically kind of aligned with the Zionist movement, and that is a waste of our time. But I do believe it is important to continue to meet with people and to talk with people. And so we'll stay open to meeting with her staff, Nick Simonko, and continue to educate him and tell him things that are coming along. But I just want to share with you a story also. I see Gloria Fern on here. She's from California. She's a strong supporter of Friends of Wadi Foquin. And she's been at it in her district where Congressman Jerry McNerney was at. And we've made presentations on Wadi Foquin as well there. Gloria, I want to ask you if you can kind of share the progress that's been made over the years.
Okay. Yeah, we've been lobbying, meeting with Jerry McNerney repeatedly since 2009. And this year he signed on to
2590.
yeah, to HR 2590 as one of the co-sponsors. But we had our best success actually at going through his staff, because his staff was really helpful, and they just what we did, I put together a group of 5 people from my church. Well, no, they weren't all from my church. 2 of us were from my church, and a couple of them were from the Democratic Party, the Democratic Central Committee in San Joaquin County, and one was from a youth group that was being very active. A young Muslim woman who grew up in Stockton was one of the women who spoke, and then just an active blogger from our community who we knew quite well, who was quite active. And the 5 of us set up a Zoom meeting with his staff member. And well, actually his staff member got him to be on this meeting. So Jerry met with the 5 of us, and we just went around the table and told him why this was important to each of us. And then we asked him what were his concerns. And it was interesting because one of his concerns was he thought this legislation was kind of left-wing legislation. And one of the lady from the Democratic Central Committee went right after him and said, you know, this isn't left or right, this is human rights. And she really went after him. And he didn't commit to do this, of course, during our meeting. He said, you know, I need to talk to people. And doggone it, about a week or 10 days later, I was on the, I was checking the co-sponsors of HR 25 on the Leginfo, or whatever it is, the Congress website every morning. And I got notice that he had signed on. And not 10 minutes later, Michael Yoshii was on that, called me and said, oh, he signed on. And then he had some more things. Since then, we've gotten him to do several other things. But once they make a public commitment, then we can work on them on all the things we would like them to do. But this was really eye-opening to me that we were able to go at him this way and use his staff. And the staff was very supportive, and it just worked for us.
Next election, we get a new congressman.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he has since resigned. Not resigned, but announced his retirement. But that's another story. He's been redistricted.
And we do believe that our presentations on Wadi Foquin helped educate in different ways to help move things forward. Because when we make the presentations on Wadi Foquin, there are things that you know cannot be refuted. You know, when we show the demolitions taking place, the destruction of natural habitat of olive trees, when we show what's going on with sewage from settlements, these are things that cannot be refuted. And you know, and as much as you were saying that the Jared will have that trope about the Palestinians being the terrorists, when we can show that people are just people trying to survive, farmers who are trying to make a living, sometimes it can break through to people, because what's happening is they are believing the propaganda that's being fed to them. You know, they're believing all of the things that are being shaped by the pro-Israeli narrative and the lobby, and then they end up spewing it out to everyone else.
Yeah.
So that's why I believe that education is so important for us to continue on all spectrums of the curve.
Yeah.
Because, you know, basically they're believing a lie, right?
Mm.
To claim that the Palestinians are the terrorists.
I wanted to, before we all get away, I wanted to thank Michael for bringing this webinar to us, because I really loved listening to the history of Wadi Foquin and the partnership. I've been affiliated with them for years, but sometimes the history and the genealogy, kind of the timeline gets confusing after a number of years, and this was really helpful. Thank you.
You know, I just want to say that I don't know where to go with all this, but you can't think that our government is gonna change. I mean, Brown and Portman went before AIPAC holding hands. Brown was speaking against the two people in our government that had the courage to stand up and speak against Israel, Omar and Tlaib, in front of AIPAC. So those guys are worried about their jobs. They are not going to help us. We need to find some other direction than thinking our government is going to change. We need to change our government or find some other way.
Well, I assume that you are all involved in BDS as well. Am I correct? Most JVP chapters are supporting BDS movements. So I mean, that's also another way that people can be engaged in activism at all different kinds of levels, and not be so concerned about the gridlock in Congress. So you can pick up that effort as well. We support that. We support, as Connie mentioned in the bio, I was one of the conveners for UMKR, which is the Methodist response to Carl's Palestine, and specifically to do divestment work and support boycott efforts. And that's another area of activism that's very, very much engaged across sectors of population. So
I just wanted to add that I feel like we're not called to be winners. We're called to be faithful, and this and there are payoffs for being faithful, and nothing you do is lost. Thank you.
You know, I didn't mention also, kind of in my own background, is that I'm Japanese American. My parents and grandparents were part of mass incarceration during World War II. My mother in Jerome and my father in Topaz. And in the early 80s, late 70s and early 80s, there was what we called the redress movement to seek reparations from the government. And so 1981 was when we had hearings for Congress to listen to the testimony of Japanese Americans. Our community thought we were wasting our time. Many people in the community thought this is never going to happen. Why are you wasting your time talking to these people? And that was a natural kind of feeling, because things had happened so many years before, and people were really not that optimistic about anything taking place. But there were different kind of movements that took place. You know, one went to the Supreme Court, one was a class action suit, and one was the establishment of the congressional body that was hearing this. And in 81, we organized our community to do their testimonies, and finally in 1988, Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which apologized to our community for the wartime injustices. And the Civil Liberties Act was an apology to Japanese Americans, but I always had seen that as something in our own history that would apply to other people as well. And so if we gave up on that, we wouldn't have gotten redress. The reparations would have never been passed. So people kept persisting on that, and we got it. John Conyers, after Japanese Americans got their redress in 1989, he began a petition for reparations for African Americans. And he couldn't get anybody to sign on to that thing for many years, and it was going nowhere, but he continued to put that forward. And last year, they started to get a number of signers onto HR 40, which is reparations for Black Americans. And they picked up steam on that and are moving through the Judiciary Committee on that. And I think they hope to bring it to the House sometime hopefully in the next couple of months, you know, for a vote on that, to establish a commission just like they did for Japanese Americans. And many people thought that would never happen as well either. But part of the reason why it picked up steam was because of Black Lives protests last year, and then more and more people taking seriously the issues of Black lives. And now they've picked up congressional support for it. And I think it's Sheila Jackson Lee in Texas who's kind of taken on the mantle from John Conyers and kind of pushing it forward. So I hear the sentiment about, you know, don't believe anything that this Congress is going to do, but I also, for whatever reason, that's been a calling for me and some of us with Friends of Wadi Foquin to continue to persist. So we'll keep doing it, even if you say you're going to give up. We'll keep doing it.
I didn't say I was going to give up. And while you're talking about all this, don't forget about the Native Americans are still colonized, and they need to be brought into all this conversation about what's going on in the world.
Absolutely.
Actually, they are. They have, you know, Native Americans have expressed some, I'm talking about some Native Americans, of course, have expressed their relationships with Palestinians. You know,
Yeah, I know.
they face a lot of the same problems. And don't forget, everyone, if anyone here is not a member or friend of JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, we are not giving up anything. We're here and we are continuing the struggle, you know, and please get in touch with us. You know, it's not open only to people of Jewish background at all. We have members from all faiths and all congregations of any faith or of any particular human rights interest. So JVP is here, and some of you know that, and we are always open for new people.
You know, back to the Native American solidarity, I'm seeing Teresa Basile on this. I don't know if, Teresa, you're not on screen, but I know she's with UMKR, and they've been doing a series of webinars on intersectionality and solidarity with Palestinians. She must be off screen. But
JVP.
they did some really, I don't know if there's still some that are upcoming, but some really good webinars looking at the doctrine of discovery and the theological kind of underpinnings of colonization of native lands here, and have really good spokespersons for the native indigenous communities with the Methodist Church, but also with other organizations as well, I think. And also they've had some good webinars connecting folks with Native Hawaiians as well. And I think you may be aware of what's going on with the Native Hawaiian struggle in terms of their sovereignty rights as well. So I think there's a lot going on around solidarity and solidarity building among the ongoing struggles that many are still continuing to articulate, and the kind of understanding the principle of the indivisibility of justice, and that, you know, we all need to be fighting for one another for the injustices that remain unresolved.
About JVP, Lori and I meet with a bunch of different peace groups. JVP to me is the most powerful one on the planet. I love JVP, and we look at their programs wherever they are.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just, Karen put some information in the chat, and I wonder if you might want to bring that point up, Karen. Are you still on the
Yeah, I'm
meeting?
here.
Okay.
Yeah, I watched a webinar this morning on East Jerusalem, where there is an area where Palestinians are supposedly allowed to build houses or additions. And it takes them years and years to get a building permit. I mean, they keep applying, they get a lawyer, they pay, nothing happens. And finally, after some years, they say, well, you know, we're going to go ahead and build the house anyway. Or in one case, the guy added a second story to his parents' house for his own family. So after they've finished the building and are living there, then suddenly the Israeli police show up with a bulldozer and they say, okay, you've got half an hour to get out of here. We're demolishing your house because you don't have a permit. And even though they can show a paper trail of having tried to get a building permit for 10 years or whatever, the Israelis ignore it. And then they charge the poor people who with the no house now, charge them a fine plus a fee for the demolition work. It's just, oh, it's heartbreaking.
That's right. And that's the kind of the irony of that whole situation, where you've got these, we call them Jim Crow laws, right, against the Palestinians, that they're using a legal justification for demolishing the home and then charging them for the fees to demolish them themselves. And that's the same with those olive trees that I showed you. Those farmers are being charged for the demolition fees on that. And then those other farmers who are having these demolition orders for their homes and for their water cisterns and for their compost facilities, they're charging them the demolition orders because they didn't get permits to build them. And they had waited for years to get permits, couldn't get them. They said, well, we're going to build it anyway. Or the soccer field that we helped fund to help them build that too, they could come at any time with their own paperwork saying, well, this is illegally built because you didn't get a permit for it. But that was their point of view at the time, to say, well, we're going to build it anyway. We're going to build this because you're going to try to take this land from us anyway. So we're going to do something in the meantime. So we have to kind of challenge all those intricate laws as well at the same time. And by the way, there was a man in Wadi Foquin who was married to a woman in East Jerusalem. They had a home in East Jerusalem. Their home got demolished during the same period of time that you're talking about. And so they packed up and came back to Wadi Foquin because he had his home there. But they just, you know, I don't know if they've done anything with that home in East Jerusalem, you know, since it's been demolished. They're also north of Wadi Foquin, there's a village called El Walaja, which when you looked at that road that's proposed to be built, the road would kind of go up there to Walaja. There have been about 30 homes demolished there over the last several months. And that's all been part of the same landscape of what's been going on in East Jerusalem as well. So there definitely is this sort of acceleration of the demolitions of property across the board.
So, Connie, do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just
Yeah.
think, you know, if there are no more questions, we could wrap up. And I would just like to thank you so much for such a inspiring presentation. You know, your steadfastness, Samud, inspires. I'm inspired, and I think that we should ask Senator Brown to visit Wadi Foquin on one of your tours.
Huh.
So maybe we can, our chapter can follow up on some of your suggestions. And thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who attended our meeting tonight.
Thank you,
Great.
Connie, for the invitation. Thanks, everybody, for taking your time out from tonight.
Thank you.
And appreciate your time and hope to look to working together with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, great.